Okay, so today we're going to talk about social process explanations of crime. We're not going to talk about all of the theories, but we're going to talk about some of the most notable theories. Maybe the thing will go and haha. So there's three perspectives that fall within the social process paradigm. And you're like, oh my gosh. So we're going to look at learning theories, we're going to look at control theories, and we're going to look at some developmental theories. Now, most of the social process theories fall within the context of symbolic interactionism. Now, I have uploaded to Blackboard 2 videos which explain this sociological theoretical framework to you, but essentially to boil it down for you into something that's extremely short but also vague. The way that symbolic interactionism works is that people interact with other people and with objects in the world, right? We interact with many things that's not inside of our minds and inside of our bodies, right? We interact with those things, and as we interact with those things, it changes the way we understand reality, right? So when I step on a thorn, I don't know, right? I'll be like, oh my gosh, thorns, they hurt, right? Or maybe if I see a thorn and someone says, hey, if you step on that with a bare foot, it's gonna hurt, right? So our interactions with things in society, with people in society and things in the real world impact the way we perceive reality. And another component of symbolic interactionism is that as we interact with others and with the world, our understanding of reality will eventually change, okay? And so social process theories all accept those theoretical underpinnings of symbolic interactionism. However, it goes off in different explanations for why criminal activity occurs. But nonetheless, you'll see all of the process theories that we will discuss today involve the process of symbolic interactionism. So the three types of theories we're going to look at are learning theories, control theories, and developmental theories. And I've picked 2 or 3 very important ones that fall within each of the perspectives. So differential association theory, I remember when I was an undergraduate student, when I first learned about this theory, I thought this was the coolest theory out there. I felt like this theory explained all of my own criminal activity, and so I was really into that. And I remember when I wrote my personal statement to get into graduate school at IUP, I mentioned that I really enjoyed learning about differential association. So differential association was created by this person named Edwin Sutherland. Some people refer to him as the father of criminology because he essentially took a bunch of social theories. Again, remember, we had the classical movement, and then in response to the classical movement came the biological theories, the psychological theories, and also the sociological theories. And so what essentially happened was, right, that we started off with this biological framework. People realized there's something about the environment that impacts this. So some people went off of this train of thought, went into psychology, and then others went into sociology, and then others maintained the biological perspective. Anyways, it doesn't matter. So the sociological branch went to either social structural theories or social process theories, right? And so differential association was probably one of the first social process theories. And Edwin Sutherland, now he has many iterations of his work, but to boil it down for you, essentially what he said was that how we interact with people will impact the way we see the world, kind of like like symbolic interactionism, right? And he said that we learn from other people why we commit crime, so we learn the justifications and definitions of things, and we learn how to commit crime. So, if so, depending on who I'm hanging out with, and also the reason why it says differential association is like you can surround yourself with many people, but think about your own group of friends, for instance, right? You have your own group of friends. There might be some people in your group of friends who you really value their opinion as opposed to others, right? We all have like those friends that we really want to impress and we really enjoy having them in our lives. And then we have those friends, we also enjoy having them in our lives, but it can go either way, right? You're not really gonna accept any of their views necessarily. They're not really the alpha dog in your group of friends. And so Edwin Sutherland was like, yeah, it kind of works like that. Like if you're with in a group of peers or maybe in your family life or whatever, people who are important to you, you're gonna learn behavior from them, but also definitions. So you're gonna learn, oh, in this situation, I should or can or could do X, Y, and Z, right? So you learn the justifications for behavior, and you learn how to define situations and behavioral responses as appropriate from other people, right? And again, you can't just put anyone in anyone's life. There's something and that we cannot necessarily explain, but there's something about certain people are just more important to the individual than other people are. And so figuring out which people are important to the actor, right, is important to understanding how they've been learning definitions and justifications for behavior. And so Edwin Sutherland said, right, this is the case for all types of behavior, but it also is the case for criminal activity. And so we learn how and why to commit crime, to boil it down. So I'll give you guys an example, right? So I remember when I went to college, I had very limited experience with smoking marijuana, right? And so I remember getting to college. I was there for the first couple weeks, and I happened to make friends with the two guys who lived across the hall from my dorm. I really liked these guys. I thought they had a really cool perspective. Both of them were from the Northeast. They were people I would have never usually would have been friends with. Like, they were just very interesting to me. We all listened to the same type of music, and we all really enjoyed watching South Park. Also, we all smoked cigarettes together, and we just happened to smoke the same type of cigarettes. So we had that bond, so we all became very close friends. Now, the one guy smoked marijuana all the time, and I had certain preconceived notions about marijuana, that it makes you a bad person, that it makes you violent, that it makes you lazy, and all these bad things that I was told in school. Now, I had dabbled a little bit before in high school, but it wasn't intense. So I see my friend across the hall. He and I become really close, and I noticed that out of everyone in our group of friends, he has the highest grades. I also noticed that among everyone in my group of friends, he has the least amount of conflict with others, meaning that he didn't get into squabbles or drama or fights with anyone, right? Yet he smoked a copious amount of marijuana all the time. And so I remember one night we're hanging out and we're smoking cigarettes, because back then in those dorms at this university in Virginia, you could smoke cigarettes in your dorms. So we're smoking cigarettes, we're chatting, and I was like, dude, how do you manage to do all this? He's like, and he told me straight up, marijuana really calms my nerves. It helps me focus. It helps me not worry about drama and BS. It makes me a very practical person, right? And so as I'm talking to him, I'm really valuing what he was saying to me, right? Because I thought that he had life figured out, right? He was doing well in school. He was he was very likable. He was a very practical person. He didn't have any prejudices or preconceived notions. He was a person who I very much valued. And he's like, I don't think it's the marijuana that makes me this person, but it definitely helps me. And so he goes, do you want to smoke some weed? And I'm like, you know what? Sure. And so I remember, as I'm gearing up to do this, right? So he had this contraption called a gravity bong, right? And so the way that the gravity bong was constructed, it was a Coke bottle, like a 2-liter Coke bottle. The bottom of the bottle was cut off, and then the cap of the bottle had a little hole in it. And in the hole, he had put a small socket wrench piece, and it was sealed with so you kind of light so what you do is you light the cap with a lighter until it gets nice and soft. You take a pencil and you stick it through, and then you shove the socket wrench piece in there as the plastic is still soft, and so when it gets hard again, it gets real tight around the socket wrench piece. And so he had a bucket of water. We filled up the bucket of water. Then we put the plastic bottle in the water, and we put marijuana in the socket wrench. We put the cap on the bottle, and then we lit the marijuana in the socket wrench, and we pulled the bottle up. And so what would happen is the flame would get sucked into the weed, which would then produce smoke that gets sucked into the bottle, and it's nicely contained in this bottle. So there's not, if you were smoking a joint or a bong or a bowl, there would be smoke everywhere in the room and we'd get caught, right? So we're containing this in there. And while he's doing this, he's showing me, look, hold the lighter a certain way. If you hold the lighter to the side, when you light it, you won't burn your finger because it'll be off to the side, right? And he said, pull really slowly. If you pull too fast, you're gonna burn too much of the weed up, or the weed might get sucked through the bottom of the socket wrench piece. So be real slow, be gentle, be patient, pull it up real slow, and then when you get to the point where you have an inch away from where the bottle would come out of the water, slowly screw off the cap and put your mouth over and inhale, and be careful not to inhale any water, right? And so he taught me why he committed this crime, right? It made him more practical. It made him, he felt like it helped him be the person he always was. And he also taught me how to commit this crime. He taught me how to light the weed. He taught me how to take the hit, right? And how to blow. And so he had this little thing, he called it a spoof, where it's an old toilet paper roll with a bunch of dryer sheets stuffed in it. Then we had a box fan that was facing outside of the window, and so he made me inhale this smoke and then blow it into the spoof out into the back of this fan, so it gets blown out into the air, right? So that when people smell what's out there, they smell dryer sheets, right? And so I did that, and I had a massive coughing fit afterwards, and it was a very intense experience. I'll say that. For those of you who might have been in those shoes before, you might understand the feeling. But after doing that, it was the first time I really experienced marijuana. It wasn't just me taking a puff here at a party or this. I was stone sober, and I took a massive gravity bong hit, right? And I loved every moment of it. I was calm. I wasn't getting so angry at things. I was able to focus and really understand my college work that I was reading. I remember I was reading a geology textbook, and I was like, this is freaking amazing. Like, it was just so cool learning about rocks. I remember, really understanding, deeply thinking about American politics at the time. At that time, I was a Republican, and I was mainly a Republican because all my friends in high school were Republicans. Again, differential association. But now at college, I was in a new environment, and I was hanging out with different people who had a mixture of political views, and I very much attributed, again, because of differential association, to becoming more honest about why I held certain political views. But nonetheless, right, my interactions with, so I had a certain understanding of a symbol named marijuana when I came to college, right? I thought it was a bad thing. I thought it was what bad people did. Violent, it creates violence, it causes laziness, all these bad things, right? And then as I interacted with my friends, my new friends, I saw them, I saw what they were saying about it, I saw their own behavior, right? I heard their explanations. They defined what was right and wrong for me, or they redefined it. They redefined what was appropriate and inappropriate, right? And then they showed me how to do this and why it is okay to do this, right? And that is differential association. I went from high school, where I had super conservative Republican friends, we were super straight edge, to college, where I had a new mixture of friends, new associations, and I noticed that certain people to me I found them to be more important because they were accomplishing things that I thought was cool to accomplish. And so whatever information I got from them, I started internalizing the way they saw certain symbols out in the world. And so therefore I started to accept their definitions of what's appropriate and what is not appropriate, and also accepted their justifications of how and why to commit certain crime, which in my case was a little bit of smoking weed. So Akers, his social learning theory was heavily based on Sutherland's differential association. And so what he said was, he was like, yeah, no, that differential association bit is cool. I agree with that. However, there's more to social learning than just differential association. For instance, differential association only focuses on person-to-person interactions, right? But what Akers added to the equation was operant conditioning, right? And operant conditioning refers to interacting with the physical world as well, right? So I might have, who of you has had a friend, you looked up to them, and essentially differential association allowed you to end up smoking some weed with that person. But then when you smoked that weed, you had the worst time ever. And you're like, I'm never touching that stuff again. Right? Some of you might be sitting there right now and you might be like, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about because I was there, right? In that case, you're like, no, whatever I'm learning from my differential associations is not the truth, because I just smoked weed and I just had a really bad time, right? And so there's also this aspect of interacting with the physical environment that also shapes your reality, right? So Akers was like, look, differential association, that's Gucci, but there's also this operant conditioning aspect to it, which includes interacting with the physical environment, especially when it comes to learning crime. And so essentially what he said, that when we learn behavior, we learn it through personal contacts and through operant conditioning. And he said social learning theory, or his social learning theory, has 4 components. He says you have this differential association that happens. However, we also include operant conditioning in that, and that through our differential association and operant conditioning, we learn definitions of what is appropriate behavior, right? And these definitions can either be general, and they reflect our overall religious or moral or ethical views, right? So you might be like, I want to, a general definition would be like, put others' needs in front of my own, right? That's a general sort of definition. However, specific definitions are the meanings that we apply to particular behaviors, right? So, like for instance, doing drugs is bad, right? Doing drugs is stupid. You're causing yourself to, you're compromising your own physical health. You're compromising your individual relationships. However, smoking marijuana is an exception because it's not quite as bad for your body as stuff like alcohol or caffeine, and at the same time, it chills me out. It's not like it's methamphetamine or cocaine or alcohol, which makes me angry. instead marijuana makes me actually really fun to be around. So, right, so you might have these general views about things, right? And they might not always be the same with your specific definitions. But nonetheless, we learn those also through differential association and through operant conditioning. Then Akers included this other aspect of imitation, right? We see what other people are doing, right? Who we look up to, right? And we imitate their behavior. Now, these can be people these can be celebrities, these can be parents, these can be friends, these can be people you kind of know a little bit, right? Anyone who for some reason you're like, that's a cool person, I'm going to do what they do. And then there's this other aspect, differential reinforcement. So just like differential association, where for some reason you just sort of look up to certain people and we don't know why, it just sort of is, right? Some people just really strike you as you want to be around them, you want to associate yourself with these types of people. Well, you also look for cues from these people, right? So people tend to avoid bad situations or bad consequences of their behavior and encourage good consequences of their behavior. And a lot of that has to do with social approval. So for instance, I might start hanging out with people who smoke a bunch of weed, right? And I'm like, these people are so cool, they're smoking weed, right? But I might get the wrong idea from them, right? So I'm smoking weed with them and I'm like, cool, so we're doing all kinds of drugs. Next thing I do is I show up to the party with a big old bag of cocaine. I'm like, hey guys, let's do some lines. And all of a sudden they're like, no, we don't touch that crap. That's bad news. Like, we smoke weed, but we do not do coke. That's extra. Don't do that, right? I might be like, oh, damn. Okay, fine. Won't bring coke around again, right? Or have you ever been in a situation where you feel like you sort of judged everyone's sense of humor, and then you make a joke and then no one laughs and you're like, damn it, now I look like an idiot? Yeah. That feeling of like, now I'm an idiot, that's a bad consequence. And so now you don't make those jokes again. And so that is differential reinforcement. So these four components then help explain behavior. So essentially what Akers did was he took Sutherland's theory of differential association and he just fleshed it out a little bit more. He said, look, there's definitions aren't just definitions. There are some that are specific, some that are general, and these don't always have to make sense to each other, right? That's why you have people who literally believe they're good people and they're doing good, but then they'll, commit robbery or murder, right? It's also why you can see why people's behavior like becomes more and more intense over time is because for some reason they're receiving that differential reinforcement, right? And then the imitation bit is just makes sense, right? We like to imitate people that we look up to. So another group of theories that fall within social learning is labeling theories. So there are many labeling theories, but we're going to focus pretty much on one, which is probably the most popular one. It was created by Lemaire or Lemert. I don't know. I'm going to say Lemaire because that sounds more, academic. I don't know. But I could be wrong. It could be Lemert or Lemert or Lemar. But who cares? 1951. Anyway, so the way that labeling theory works is it says that part of who we think we are depends on how other people perceive us, right? So that, in a sense, like we eventually become caricatures of ourselves, right? So, you might be able to identify with this to some extent. I remember when I first started teaching, right? I was just teaching. I didn't know anything about how the students perceived me. But then when I read my first group of teacher evaluations, I realized that I'd say 60% of the students said that I was the funniest professor they'd ever encountered. And so I started making more jokes. as a result of that, I was like, oh, so that's who I am. I am the funny professor, right? Which I'm realizing the older I'm getting, the less funny I become and the more boring. But that's that's not just my teaching style. It's sort of my whole life. The older you get, the more boring you become. The more you become the person you never wanted to become as a kid. Okay, let's not go down that road. But nonetheless, we all might understand there's some power, right, to how other people perceive us and how we identify. Like, sometimes like when you hear how other people perceive you and you've never seen yourself that way, you're like, maybe I am that way, right? And then sometimes you might even start behaving that way. And so some people try to say, look, that's what explains crime, but it's difficult to do that because when you try to not label people as bad, it doesn't always cause them to not be deviant. And so Lemaire said, well, you get primary deviance and secondary deviance, right? Meaning that, like, for some reason, biological, sociological, or like social structural or psychological, something causes you to commit deviance at a young age, right? And then how we are responded to by society, if we're then labeled as a bad kid, right? Then we start internalizing those labels. Lemaire calls a secondary deviance. So it's pretty much only labeling that then impacts our deviant behavior. And as people respond to you with criminal sanctions and by stigmatizing you, you then begin to internalize that self-image as, yeah, I'm a bad person. I'm supposed to be the bad person. I'm the bad person. And then any additional acting out then has to do with the image that you were given by others. So now when we look at control theories, we're going to look at two control theories. One of those is Hershey's social bonding theory, and then the second one is Gottfredson and Hershey's general theory of crime. Now, as you'll notice, Hershey is in both of them. Hershey was really cool. He, at some point in time, I think in 1969, his dissertation research essentially created the social bonding theory. Now, to give you some perspective, social process theories and social structural theories and some psychological theories had sort of dominated the overall criminological thinking up until the 1970s or so, where the neoclassical school came back. So people started moving away from people don't have so much control over their own behavior to no, people do, people are rational, etc. So that's where deterrence theory made a comeback, routine activities theory, rational choice theory. But some of these social process theories also started to accept some of the neoclassical notions, although I wouldn't classify these as neoclassical theories. But what they started looking at things like people are naturally self-serving. And so why don't people just commit crime, right? That was what flipped it all on its head, is when Travis Hershey was like, why don't people commit crime? Like, we're trying to figure out why do people commit crime. Why don't we just ask the question of why don't they commit crime, right? And that's important because, some of you might have been at like a red, like I've used this example before, but I'll use it again because it's very true. If you've ever stopped at a red light and then there's a pedestrian crossing and the pedestrians are crossing and the only thing that is keeping those people alive is my foot on a pedal because I'm looking at a color that's telling me to stop. Just take a second to understand how fragile that really is and how vulnerable those people are. I have a vehicle, okay, that will kill somebody if I hit them. And I'm sitting there, and the only thing that stopped me was the color red And the fact that I said, okay, fine, I'll put my foot on this pedal, but only until you turn green. Like, all of that is just made up, right? The color, like red means stop. That's made up. We made that up, and we're basing life and death on that. So Travis Hirsch is like, well, why don't people just run through that? It's not, nothing serious is really stopping you, right? It's the freaking color red. And so what he says is the reason why people choose to follow the law is because of social bonds. We are bound to society in some way. And that's why most people don't commit crime. But if we did not have social bonds, we would have no incentive to stop at a red light. Right? And I think about that because when I was in high school, I loved shoplifting. Right? I loved it. I didn't need anything. I just loved the thrill of doing it. It was amazing. If you've ever shoplifted, you know what I'm talking about, right? There's something about that. You've stolen something. You already feel that power of like, I just took something that I didn't pay for. I just took it. I can literally go anywhere and I can have whatever I want, right? So you took something, and then when you go through that, the sensors, right, that might go off, that might not go off, that rush, because you're like, it's either going to be success or it's going to be let's go, let's run, right? And that feeling, that like, oh my gosh, this is that adrenaline rush is amazing. And then it's even better when you walk through that stuff and you got away with it, right? It's this nervous adrenaline excitement and then relief when you walk through it. That is an amazing feeling. But I remember starting to date this girl towards the end of high school, and I remember telling her about, why I like to shoplift. And she was like, why? And she's like, that's so dumb. She's like, you can get that feeling from so many other things, but instead you decide to rip people off. She's like, you are the reason why every time I go to the store, I see more and more measures to control or to stop theft, and it makes the shopping experience more difficult. Now, that rationalization she gave me meant nothing to me, but the fact that the person I was with, the person who I at that point loved, did not approve of my behavior. And I immediately stopped. It was immediate. It was absolutely immediate. It's because I was attached to my girlfriend at the time. Right? And so what Travis Hershey said with his social bonding theory is that social bonds, if you are bound to society, you're not going to commit crime. And there are four different elements to the social bond. He said attachment to family and intimate people you love, people you care about, people you don't want to let down, right? So my wife, my daughter, my parents, right? My friends, how attached I am to others. Commitment. Am I committed to people in society, right? I can have friends and all that, but am I committed to doing good things in society? Am I committed to working hard, right? Am I going to school? Do I have a job? Do I go to church or whatever? Temple, mosque, whatever. Am I involved in my commitments, right? Do I spend a lot of time doing pro-social things? Do I volunteer? Do I work many hours? Do I spend a lot of time doing homework? How much of my time do I spend not doing pro-social things? How committed and how involved am I in pro-social institutions? And lastly, what are my beliefs? Do I have religious views? Do I have moral views? What are they? Right? Do I believe that I should put other people's needs in front of my own? Do I value hedonism or selfishness? Am I someone who cares about myself more than others? Or is it the other way around? Do I believe in hard work? Do I believe in cheating? Right? So those four things are different elements of the social bond. And so as Travis Hershey said, if you lack social bonds, especially attachment, he said attachment is the most important one, and guess what? Research shows it is. Then you will not likely commit crime. Or the crimes you commit will be or the deviance that you commit will be very, very small little infractions, right? So this is a great theory because it explains all crime, right? You can for my master's synthesis, I explained child molestation through social bonding theory, which is not typically a theory used to explain that, right? Essentially what I said is that the reason why not all pedophiles molest children is because social bonds keep the ones who don't offend from molesting children. The attachment and beliefs and commitment and involvement keeps them away from molesting children. However, over time, criminologists started discovering something. And we call that the age crime curve. Something that no matter how you measure it, you can't really dispute that crime is for some reason connected to age. And Travis Hershey at that time had difficulty explaining the age crime curve through social bonding theory. And so he and Michael Gottfredson came up with a new theory in 1990, and then they revised it again sometime later. But essentially, they called this the general theory of crime. And some people at the time called it the theory to end all theories, but as we'll learn, no, it did not end all theories, and there are much better theories that came out after it, but it's still a really good theory. Essentially, they said, let's not worry about looking at crime as much as we should look at analogous behavior, meaning behavior that is driven by low self-control and impulsivity, because all crime falls under that category. So analogous behavior is not just, it's legal and illegal behavior that is characterized by low self-control, right? And think about any crime. Smoking weed, well, that's me having low self-control. Meaning low self-control, meaning like you don't care about long-term goals, you focus on short-term gratification, you're impulsive, right? Think about robbing someone. Well, you don't want to buckle down and work hard and make money the honest way. You'd rather just stab somebody to get some money real quick. Think about murder, right? You can't get yourself to overcome your rage or your anger or whatever it is why you want to kill someone, and so you act out and you kill them. Or sometimes murder can be very impulsive, right? Especially when you hear those stories of like the parents who kill their children, their babies, right? There was a case in Evansville, Indiana, when I still lived there, where this dude just smashed just beat his young daughter to death because she wouldn't stop crying and he wanted to play video games, right? Impulsive. So you can explain any crime, but there are other behaviors that are not illegal, right? That are also impulsive and low self-control, like smoking cigarettes, like gambling, like I don't know, I guess in some states frequenting prostitutes, right? Lying, right? So some of those, so that's why they said, let's not worry about looking at just crime. We should look at analogous behavior. And when we look at analogous behavior, that makes more sense of the age crime curve. And so what they said was that people who have high levels of self-control do not do not get involved in analogous behaviors, right? So they focus on long-term gratification, and therefore you don't see them committing analogous behavior. But people with low self-control engage in analogous behavior. And so they're like, okay, then why do you see the age crime curve? Do people's low self-control go away over time, right? Because let's look at these at the control curve here. Whoops a daisy. Sorry, the crime curve here, right? You see it goes up and then it goes down. Goes up and it goes down, right? And it doesn't matter how you measure it, whether you do it by delinquency that's self-reported or you do it by arrests, right? It's very similar. And so they said, no. Again, analogous behavior is analogous behavior, and that is going to be consistent. It's just the amount of illegal analogous behavior you commit over time is going to decrease because there's going to be fewer opportunities for you with age to engage in illegal analogous behavior. And that you're going to learn that, oh, well, if I continue to smoke and gamble, right, well, that will, or drink alcohol, right, that will keep me out of trouble, right? So you're still engaging in those behaviors. You just have fewer opportunities to commit, to engage in criminal analogous behavior. And so they were like, well, what causes this? And this is my main criticism with the theory, and many other people's criticism with the theory, is that they said, well, it's ineffective child rearing. It's whatever happens in the very first couple of years of a child's life up until 8. After you're about 8 years old, then you're going to be consistent. Your ability to control your own behavior, your ability to have self-control is sort of fixed at age 8. And therefore, it is very important when it comes to child rearing. Now, just because I don't like it doesn't mean it's not true. There's a lot of support for this, right? That the first 8 years of your life are very important, very formative, right? And then if you screw someone up during that time, it's going to be very hard to undo those things. But the problem with this theory is that there's not a lot of great policy options for it, right? And so other people like Terry Moffat and Sampson and Lobb took this age crime curve and they try to explain it in a different way. That actually makes a lot more sense. But anyways, before we get into that, general theory of crime, the way you interact with people in your younger years, right? The social processes that occur during the first 8 years of your life are internalized and then can impact the way that you're able to control yourself in the future. And so you will begin to engage in analogous behavior at a very young age, and that analogous behavior will be consistent throughout time. It's just at different ages and different stages in your life, people are presented with more or less opportunities to commit crime. And when you have more opportunities to commit crime, your analogous behavior will likely turn illegal until you reach an age where there are fewer opportunities to commit crime again. The only way to do that, to stop that, is to limit criminal opportunities and to focus on the first 8 years of a child's life. So you might want to think, what kind of policies are good for that? So Terry Moffat did a massive literature review of studies that followed people throughout their lives, studying delinquency using all kinds of different explanations to do so. And so she used all of that literature to explain exactly what's going on. And so subsequent research has found a lot of support for her theory. So what Moffat said was that actually the age crime curve, which we see here, actually should be broken up into two types of lines here, right? In that lost within these crime curves are a second type of person. And so she said, when you look at people's lives, if you look at all of the longitudinal research, you can actually pull two types of people out of it. One type of person, which makes up most people, are adolescent limited criminals. And this follows the normal age crime curve. Again, that's most people. So that would make sense why the age crime curve would look like this, because most people influence these numbers. But there's a very small percentage of people, I think it's about 2% of people, that are life course persistent criminals. These are people that no matter what opportunities they have or how old they are, they're just bad people. They're life course persistent people. And a lot of this can have to do with early neurological issues, which have then been reinforced through social learning, through labeling, through all these other social process theories that we've talked about, right? That it's that primary deviant, right? Some neurological issues that put them on a different trajectory, right? And so because of their neurological deficiencies, they might be labeled a certain way, they might interact with different people a different way, they might differentially associate with other people, but nonetheless, they are constantly bad throughout their lives. And so when we then look at the age crime curve, we shouldn't just see one type of person. We should look at two types of people. And the policy aimed at reducing crime or preventing crime should consider that there are two types of criminals. That there are adolescent limited criminals. And so what might work for adolescent limited people, right, to get someone who is an adolescent who's committing crime, right, to get them to stop, might be different for someone who's life course persistent. You might need more intensive care for someone who's life course persistent, someone who's stuck in that vicious cycle, to undo it, right? And this makes sense. Adolescent limited makes sense. How many of you committed some form of deviance when you were an adolescent, right? Maybe you tried to smoke a cigarette, or maybe in your case, you guys vaped, right? Maybe you messed around with some weed, right? Maybe you shoplifted a little bit. Maybe you egged people's homes, or maybe you made napalm in a Rubbermaid. Maybe you were just a really bad adolescent like I was. And it makes sense though, right? Because think about it. Like, think about when you were going through puberty, right? Like, I remember myself, right? I remember all of a sudden my voice went weird, and then my nose would not stop growing, but the rest of my body wouldn't. The rest of my body would, right? So like I had this massive nose, and I still have a massive nose, right? I remember all of a sudden I was tall one day, right? But like my arms got taller than the rest of my, like it was just weird. You grow in these weird little spurts. And the same thing happens to your brain. The way your brain develops is the same thing, right? So it's an awkward time of sort of changing. So there's all these neurological things happening, which then impact psychological things, which then impact the way you interact with the world. I remember, think about when you were a senior in high school, right? You thought that you had it freaking figured out. And you might still think you have it figured out. Well, guess what? When you graduate college and you get into the real world, you'll be like, oh my gosh, I do not have it all figured out. And that's why this goes on from about your early teens to mid-20s. And then after that, you're like, oh, okay, now, then you finally sort of get it. And then you don't want to commit crime anymore. Right? I remember, I remember this. So you get to this point, right? So in college, right now, you guys are in college. So right now you're in this phase where when you guys have parties, everyone gets wasted. And that's sort of normal. When everyone accepts that norm. People go to parties to get freaking crunk. So if you see someone who's like puking drunk, it's not abnormal, right? You might laugh at them, right? But it's not like, wow, that person has a problem. And I remember, so as I went into my 20s, you graduated from college, you started working, and then you have parties, right? There's still this like kind of college element to it, but it's a little more grown up. And then like you would have friends who would still get a little drunk and puke or whatever, and you'd be like, okay, that's cool. I don't do that anymore, but cool. And then like when you reach your mid to late 20s, when someone got that drunk, it would be like a turnoff. You'd be like, dude, we're not hanging out anymore. Like, this is not college anymore. All right, you need to stop. Like, stop breaking my shit. Like, I have really nice stuff in my house now, and you just broke a really nice thing in my house. Right? So, like, the older you get, the less cool you think it is to get that trashed. Right? And now, I mean, I have 2 beers on a Friday night, and I hate my life on a Saturday. That's how sad I am. But nonetheless, as we grow, as we mature, so do our brains. And the way our brains mature then impact the way we interact with symbols in society. And most people will go through the normal age crime curve as they figure out how life works. While you get this small percentage of life course persistent people who are just bad people. And those people require different policies to help them stop committing crime or to prevent them from committing crime than people who are just adolescent limited. Sampson and Lobb accepted the way that Moffat saw it, in that there are people who more strictly follow the age crime curve and people who don't. Did they call them life course persistent and adolescent limited? No. They took a different approach. So they found very old data that followed people for a very long time and then used that to come up with their age-graded theory of crime. But again, this also looks at the age crime curve and explains that not every single person follows the same type of trajectory when it comes to their criminal career. And so one thing that they focus on is they focus on the life trajectory of a person, or the criminal career trajectory. So they look at what happens at a young age, what happens in adolescence, and then what factors causes people, those people who do commit crime beyond the adolescent years, what causes them to continue to commit crime, right? And so things that are important to know about this theory is that there's trajectories and then there are turning points, okay? And turning points are what essentially create an opportunity for you to no longer to commit crime, okay? So their age-graded theory looks at 3 stages in life. They look at the juvenile delinquency era. They look at transitions to becoming an adult, right? So pretty much where you're at right now, right? You're in that transition between being an adolescent and an adult, like that young adult area. And then being an adult criminal, like someone like myself who's in their 30s and still committing crime. And so they say what's very important is the juvenile stage, right? That's where you are. That's the beginning of where your trajectory is set, right? And there are 2 important factors that impact delinquent behavior at a young age, and that is the family context and background factors. So these are your social structural factors that we've talked about previously, right? Social disorganization, strain, do a bunch of people live in your house, right? Just think about that. If you are in a poor living situation and there are 17 people living in your house, how much time are your parents going to have to really discipline you and raise you, right? If you are already poor and there's like 17 people living in your house and now your parents have to focus on getting money to feed everyone, how much time are they actually going to have to instill pro-social norms in you, right? So background factors and with a combination of family contextual factors all impact to what extent you engage in juvenile delinquent behavior, right? So as you're engaging in juvenile delinquent behavior, right, and you're becoming older, the problem is, and they call this cumulative continuity, the more you engage in criminal behavior at a young age, the more doors you close for yourself to act in more appropriate ways, right? So think about this for a second, right? I had a friend, he was in high school, and his family was really rich, right? And he was able to have a internship working for a senator on Capitol Hill one summer. But he had to pass a drug test, he had to pass a series of interviews, and all this stuff. Then I had another friend who was sent to military school because he was smoking weed and doing a bunch of bad stuff, right? Two people with whom I was friends. One did not commit a bunch of juvenile delinquency when they were young, and therefore had opportunities to go work for a senator one summer, while the other one smoked a bunch of weed and stole a bunch of stuff and got in a bunch of trouble. Then his parents, who were super rich, sent him to military school, right? So the more criminal acts we commit at a younger age, the more doors it closes for you in the future, right? I mean, think about those stories you hear of people doing something stupid during their senior year, and then opportunities to go to Harvard or some big school gets taken away, right? Admissions get rescinded, right? So as we continue to engage in criminal activity, we close doors, and as we close those doors, we sort of narrow in on a much more criminal trajectory, right? You get involved in a bunch of bad stuff, you stop doing hot in school, you don't go to college, then you have less opportunities available to you, and more of those opportunities are criminal. So that's called cumulative continuity. Then, when you're aged out of that, so now you're maybe in your mid to late 20s, maybe early 30s, right? You're still committing that crime. You are now an adult criminal having a long-lasting criminal career. Now, it is in adulthood where you are offered a lot of opportunities to turn your life around. And this is what they say explains the age crime curve. Why the age crime curve looks the way it looks. Because in adulthood, you are confronted with marriage, you're confronted with careers, with proper jobs, with good pay, stability, a house, children, right? And as you hit these potential turning points that introduce you to social capital. Social capital is a way of looking at relationships you have with other people that turn into positive things for you, right? Who here's ever had a friend who hooked them up with a job, right? Or who here started dating someone, and then someone who knew the person that you were dating hooked you up with an internship, then hooked you up with a job, right? That is social capital. And so when you're an adult and now you're dating, right, and you're learning, oh, okay, well, this woman doesn't want me to be shoplifting, so you stop shoplifting, or this person doesn't really smoke weed, so you stop smoking weed, or or whatever, or this person hangs out with these types of people, right? You begin to change your behavior. And so one of the biggest turning points that opens you up to more social capital is marriage and children, right? So these checkpoints or turning points in life can alter your trajectory to a point where you no longer can or want to commit crime. And they say that's what explains the age crime curve, right? That's why the age crime curves look like this, because when do people usually get married? When do people usually get those serious jobs? When do people usually say, okay, I need to support my kid that I had or whatever, right? It's around this age, around young adulthood. And so they're like, that's why the age crime curve exists, and that's also why you hear about these really heinous criminals. Why not everyone stops committing crime? And that is social process theories in a nutshell.